In this section, we will talk about quadratic functions. A quadratic function is in the form f of x equals to ax squared plus bx plus c, where the highest degree is a 2, and the value of a is not equal to 0. There are a couple of ways to solve quadratic equations. First is to solve quadratic equations by factoring. Now, if you need review of factoring, then please talk to me during class, or please talk to me after class. I would be happy to give you a review. Or you can also YouTube a video on factoring, and you'll find lots and lots of videos. I'm going to give you guys a very brief recap here. So here are the steps to factoring. Step number 1, factor out the GCF, or the greatest common factor. That's always going to be step 1. So between x squared and negative 5x, our greatest common factor is x. So we factor that out. When you factor something out, to factor is to divide out. So we are going to divide both of these terms by x, and this helps us figure out what's left over inside. Let me actually move this down a little bit. This helps us determine what's left over in the parentheses when you divide each of these terms by the greatest common factor. So once again, between x squared and negative 5x, the greatest common factor is x. So we write that outside the parentheses. And then we divide each of these terms by the GCF. X squared divided by x is x. 5x divided by x is just simply 5. If you want to check to see if you did it correctly, x times x is x squared, x times negative 5 is negative 5x. When you distribute, you should get what you started off with, which is correct. Okay, so we had x times x minus 5 equals to 0. Now this is factored, so we don't have to go to step 2. At this point, we are going to use something called the zero product property. Now here's what the zero product property says. It says if two terms multiply to be 0, then either a must be 0 or b must be 0, or they can both be 0, but one of them has to be 0. There's no way to multiply two terms and have them equal to 0 unless one of them is 0. So if x times x minus 5 is equal to 0, then either x must equal to 0 or x minus 5 must equal to 0. So x equals to 0, that's already solved. That's one solution. X minus 5 must equal to 0. So if I add 5 to each side, I get x equals to 5. Now, we're not going to check every single time, but I want to check just to show you guys that these solutions, they actually work. So if I plug in x equals to 0 in my original equation, I will get 0 to the second power minus 5 times 0. And I want to check, does that in fact equal to 0? So 0 squared is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, that does equal to 0. That checks out. Let's check the 5. We have 5 to the second power minus 5 times 5. We want to check, does that equal to 0? So 5 squared is 25, 5 times 5 is 25, 25 minus 25 is 0. Since 0 equals to 0, that also checks out. Okay, so our solution set is going to be these two numbers. It's going to be 0 and 5. And typically, we write a solution set using these little squiggly brackets. All right, let's take a look at example 2. We want to solve x squared plus 3x equals to 28. So step 1, well, actually, there's step 0. Step 0 is get all the terms on one side. So we have x squared plus 3x plus 28 is equal to 0. So step 0, get all the terms on one side and try to keep the x squared positive. I'm sorry, this should be minus 28 because I'm subtracting 28 from each side, so it should be a minus 28. I apologize. All right, step 1. So step 0, get everything onto one side, other side has to be 0. Step 1, factor out the GCF between x squared, 3x, and negative 28. There's no common factor, there's no GCF, so we skip that step. Step 2, we make our x factor. And here's what goes in the x factor. On top, we put a times c, and on the bottom, we put b. Now, what are a and b and c equal to? So a is a coefficient of the x squared, b is a coefficient of the x, and c is a constant. So we put a times c. So 1 times negative 28, that's negative 28, that goes on top, and the middle term 3 goes on the bottom of the diamond. Then we figure out which numbers multiply to be negative 28 and add up to be 3. So in this case, those are going to be 7 and negative 4. 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. 7 plus negative 4 is 3. Now at this point, there are lots of ways to factor. Here's the way I use. And again, you don't have to do it this way. If you don't like this way, then YouTube another way, or ask me during class, ask me after class. But here's how I do it. I take the x squared and I ignore the square. I just take the x. And I make this into a fraction, and I put x over 7, x over negative 4. So I just take this, put it over the two numbers. Then I reduce it. X over 7 is already in reduced form. X minus 4 is already in reduced form. Once I reduce, this falls over. So this becomes x plus 7, and the x falls over. This becomes x minus 4. And that is equal to 0. Let's do a quick check to see if we did it correctly. So we have x squared. We have negative 7x, negative 4x, and a 7x. That's a 3x. Then you have 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. So this is good. Now, by the zero product property, x plus 7 must be 0, or x minus 4 must be 0, which means x must be negative 7, or x must be positive 4. So our solution set is going to be negative 7 and positive 4. Okay, take a look at this. If you need more of an explanation, think of questions you have, and I'll be happy to answer them in class. Next example, 12x squared minus 11x plus 2 equals to 0. So let's go through our steps. Step 0, everything has to be on one side, other side has to be 0. That's done. Step 1, we're going to factor out the GCF. Between 12, 11, and 2, there is no GCF, so we skip that step. Step 2, we make the x factor. We put a times c on top, we put the b on the bottom. So in this case, on top of the x factor, I'm going to put 12 times 2, which is 24. On the bottom, I'm going to put negative 11. Now I got to find two numbers which multiply to be 24 and add up to be negative 11. Now sometimes you can just figure out, oh, I know what these numbers are. Other times, you won't be able to. So in that case, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to list all the factors of 24, starting with 1, and always go in order. So there's 1 times 24, there's 2 times 12, there's 3 times 8, and there's 4 times 6. Okay, list all the things that multiply to be 24, starting with 1. Because remember, whatever these two numbers are, they have to multiply to be 24. So let's put all the things that multiply to be 24. Then put in the correct signs. Because the 24 is positive, these have to be two positives or they have to be two negatives. Otherwise, how could you get a positive 24? But since the 11 is a negative, we are going to have two negatives. And then we got to find the two numbers which add up to be negative 11. Those are negative 3 and negative 8. So we have negative 3, negative 8. Now again, at this point, there are many ways to factor. Here's the one I'm going to be using. If you don't like this way, that's fine. Then find a different method. I take the 12x squared, I ignore the square, and I just put 12x over negative 3 and 12x over negative 8. Okay, so the 12x is always positive, the negative goes with the denominator. And then I reduce this. So 12x over negative 3, so I think to myself, what can divide 12 and 3? Well, 3 can divide 3, and 3 can divide 12. So if I reduce this, I get 4x, negative 3 divided by 3 is negative 1. So I reduce that. Then I have 12x over negative 8. I think to myself, what can divide 12? What can divide 8? Well, 4 can. So 4 divides 8, and then 4 divides 12. So this gives me 3x. All right, this is getting kind of messy. This gives me 3x over negative 2. Once these are reduced, they just fall over. So we have 4x minus 1, and then the 3x minus 2 falls over, and we have 3x minus 2 equal to 0. Okay, so once you have these numbers, we got -3, -8, they multiply to be 24, add up to be -11. Put 12x, 12x on top, reduce it, just reducing fractions. Divide them both by 3, we get 4x, -1. These get divided by 4, so we have 3x, -2. Then, by the zero product property, if these two terms multiply to be 0, then either 4x1 must equal to 0 or 3x minus 2 must equal to 0. Okay, so this means that x equals to 1/4 if I solve this equation, or x equals to 2/3 if I solve this equation. So my solution set is going to be 1/4, comma 2/3. Again, you will have questions on this, and that's fine. Just think of what they are, bring them to class. Okay, last one of factoring. Step 0, we have to move everything to one side. Move it to the side where the x squared is positive. So we have 15x squared. We subtract 27x, and we add 12, and that equals to 0. Okay, first, factor out the GCF. So these all have a common factor of 3. So I'm going to get 5x squared minus 9x plus 4 equals to 0. How did I get these terms? Whatever my GCF is, I divide each of these by that GCF, which is 3. So 15 divided by 3 is 5x squared, 27 divided by 3 is 9x, 12 divided by 3 is 4. Now here's the thing, this 3, it's an integer, it's not a variable. So we can just divide through by it. Because it's not a variable, so how could it equal to 0? So anytime you have a number, just divide through by the number, because 0 divided by 3 is 0. So we get 5x squared minus 9x plus 4 is equal to 0. So step 1 is done. We took out the GCF. Now do the x factor. So on top, we're going to put 20. On the bottom, we're going to put -9. We got to find two numbers which multiply to be 20, add up to be -9. Those are going to be -4 and -5. -4 times -5 is 20. -4 minus 5 is -9. Then I take my 5x and write that on top of the -4, write that on top of the -5. Then I reduce. So 5x and -4, that's reduced. So one factor is going to be 5x minus 4. The 5x just falls over. Now the 5x and -5, you can reduce these. You can divide these by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is just 1x. -5 divided by 5 is -1. So this falls over, and my other factor is going to be x minus 1. And that is equal to 0. You should always do a quick check, by the way. You got 5x squared, -5x and -4x is -9x, so that's good. -4 times -1 is 4, so we factored correctly. Now by the zero product property, if two factors multiply to be 0, then either 5x minus 4 must be 0 or x minus 1 must be 0, which means x must be 4/5 or x must be 1. Okay, and that takes care of solving by factoring.